Now, the rest of chapter 14 tells a very sad tale of how far Saul has already slipped in his leadership. And you can read the rest of the story on your own, 2 more pages here, of where he came this close to killing his own son Jonathan because of a silly decree that Saul had made over here, not knowing that his son Jonathan had started this whole thing. And he said, made a mandate, nobody eat or drink anything until we're done fighting. Jonathan didn't hear that, and he's going to eat some honeycomb, and Saul's then going to want to kill his son for that. Gratefully, many of the people step in and save his life and say, you will not do that to Jonathan after what he did on this day.
I love all the lessons we can get out of the scriptures if we take the time to think about how they might apply to us. 1 Samuel 15 is a very sobering text because of what happens to Saul. He's given very explicit instructions from Samuel the prophet about what he's supposed to be doing as a king. So he goes to fight a battle, and he doesn't do exactly what he's supposed to. And I want to point out specifically, if you look at verse 12, and when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set him up a place, and has gone about and passed on and gone down to Gilgal. So a couple of things. We might read that and say, they're supposed to meet, and Saul wasn't there. Don't miss a meeting with a prophet. When the prophet has given you explicit instructions from God, we're supposed to meet here. But even more problematic is what Saul is doing here. This phrase, and he set him up a place. Now, in English, we might not think about that. The original Hebrew means he set himself up a memorial. God's asking you, do this work, protect my people. And it's not for your glory. Wasn't there a whole battle in the premortal life with one guy wanting glory for doing God's work? So Saul has won this battle, didn't win the battle according to God's instructions, and establishes a monument for himself. I find this extremely telling, that in God's view of leadership, leaders should not be setting up personal monuments and memorials to themselves of any type. We should be memorializing God who delivers, God who empowers, God who saves. And this is one among many things that Saul does to lose the divine designation as God's chosen king.
Isn't it fascinating then the way Samuel talks to him after this experience? These are some of the most sobering words in the whole story of 1 Samuel. Verse 17, and Samuel said, when thou wast little in thine own sight, was thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed thee king over Israel? That's sobering. Saul, when you were little in your own sight, God gave you big things. And now you think you've done such big things that you're no longer little in your own sight. You think you're the end-all be-all, where you're going to set up memorials so that everybody now glorifies you. You've now taken the attention off of heaven and you've put it on you. This isn't ending well. And then he has some other discourse with him about, you didn't obey. And he's like, no, I made a sacrifice. He's trying to defend, in his pride, he's trying to defend what he did rather than saying, you're right, Samuel. I need some time to go to the Lord and get right with him, and then get right with you, and then get right with the people and try to correct these wrongs because you're right. I'm struggling right here. Instead, he's defending it. And then look at verse 22. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams.
And it gets worse. Verse 24, it's almost as if Saul did not hear what Samuel had just taught. He said, I have sinned, for I have transgressed, repented, as you were talking about, the commandment of the Lord and thy words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. So he's basically saying, I did what the people told me to do. Now, good leaders do listen to the people, right? You listen to God and you listen to people. A good leader does not just simply impose his will on people without knowing them. There's this powerful principle called empathy. And there's this field of study called design thinking, where you actually spend time immersed in people's lives to understand what they need so you can design solutions for them. Good leaders do that. They create solutions based on real people's needs. Terrible leaders, non-covenantal leaders, leaders who should not be followed, are ones who, instead of taking ownership of their own bad choices, blame the people. No good leader should ever blame the people for their own mistakes. And this is kind of what Saul is doing.
Now, gratefully, there's a little bit of a reprieve for Saul here in verse 30 and 31. He says, Then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, I pray thee, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and turn again with me that I may worship the Lord thy God. So it's not perfect, but we're going to celebrate baby steps in the right direction, right? He's still wanting to look good in the eyes of the people.
Yeah. Honor me.
Honor me in the eyes of the people.
Honor God first, then maybe we can work with you, Saul.
So Samuel, in verse 31, turned again after Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. But you'll notice it's not going to last very long. You go down to chapter 16, and it's time to pick a replacement. But that replacement isn't going to take the throne for years. We're going to struggle with Saul for many, many more years here in the rest of 1 Samuel.